We are nearly $200 million of sales for Nestle that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't asked our organization to come up with ideas. A big idea has to stem from a big problem. That freedom to fail just unlocks so much creativity.
I'm thrilled to be joined by Doug Munk, Senior Director of New Business Ventures at Nestle USA. Doug is an expert in recognizing and scaling ideas with transformative potential. And with a career full of examples where bold thinking meets smart strategy, under his leadership, Nestle has developed products that don't just respond to customer needs, but set new standards in their categories. Doug's here to share insights on what makes a big idea truly impactful, from identifying market potential to galvanizing support. If you're looking to go behind the scenes of an iconic powerhouse company and understand the magic behind taking a vision and making it a reality, then you're at the right place. Doug, thank you so much and welcome.
Thanks for having me, Toria. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining. I'm so excited to have you here. Doug, you and I first met and first connected earlier this year at Nestle's Open Channel Challenge Pitch Day, where I had a chance to see you and the team in action. It was so much fun. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Nestle's Open Channel Challenge Pitch Day?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to, Toria. So, about 6 years ago now, our CEO that had just come on board, his name's Steve Presley, had really taken a view of the organization and really saw that innovation at that time was really relegated to specific functions within the organization, specifically marketing and R&D. And, Steve really drove a cultural transformation here at Nestle USA to say that everyone, we're all consumers, right? All 20,000 of us have been gifted this sense of innovation and creativity. It's not just confined to a group or a specific individual. And to empower that, he really set out to really ensure that everyone felt that they had a voice in driving an impact for Nestle USA. And so thus was conceived Open Channel. So about 6 years ago, we set out to really ask our organization of nearly 20,000 employees, what ideas do you have in food and beverage to change the game, leveraging the wonderful, fantastic brands that we have? And here we are 6 years later. Toria, when I met you earlier this year, the challenge was, how do we win with Gen Z, right? A cohort of consumers that is not only driving increased purchase power themselves, but influencing multiple generations. And so it was exciting to be a part of that. But here we are 6 years later, and it hasn't just been a cultural revolution that I talked about where everyone feels empowered to innovate for the organization, but it has driven impact. We are nearly $200 million of sales for Nestle that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't asked our organization to come up with ideas. And that's been very exciting for us to drive for this period of time.
I love that. I love the notion that a big idea can come from anywhere, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, at the end of the day, you know, a big idea has to stem from a big problem.
Mm.
And in our daily lives, Tori, you and I, everyone around us, we have problems that we're maybe just used to, we don't even see. But when we ask 20,000 people, they are able to sense those and come up with solutions that they would love to see. And the reason we call it open channel, they never had a channel by which to share that idea with. And so we've really created a channel for them to share these ideas and pitch them to our executive leadership team with Steve at the forefront of that. And truly, we've driven ideas from across the organization, every level, from divisional president to those, who are really at the front line of things on the factory floor, creating new ideas for the organization and across multiple functions. In fact, you have many people in HR, supply chain, manufacturing, procurement that have been just waiting for this opportunity to share their ideas with the rest of the organization. And in large part, most of the successful ideas have come from those groups.
I love that because what it says is that anyone can be an innovator as long as you have a great problem to solve. Can you tell me a little bit more about, what you look for in those ideas? Can you describe, for the ideas that are presented this way, I mean, presented on that day, is there something specific that you're looking for that really cues to you that it has the potential of being a big idea?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So typically when we run a open channel challenge, we'll get roughly 500 ideas, sometimes more from across the organization. And so you can imagine it's quite a vetting process to go from 500 to what we typically do is select six to
Right.
then go in front of the leadership team and pitch to them. And it goes back to what I shared earlier. Is there a consumer problem to be solved? And
Right.
that may sound simple and may sound easy, but in fact, I think it's the hardest part, especially when you work in an organization where sometimes you think your brand uh, can do so much. And sometimes, there's a lot of products that are put out in the hopes that your brand's powerful enough to drive it as a sustainable solution. But the reality is, if it's not anchored in a attention or a consumer job to be done, then it isn't a sustainable solution. And so, to that end, that is what we look for first and foremost, right? Is it solving a consumer need? And then on top of that, really where we choose those six is sometimes the ideas that are put forward not only articulate a strong consumer need, but there's potential for it to be even bigger, whether it is how do we extend that across different brands, different formats. So we look for what we call platform ability, right? Can it be bigger than maybe what the original idea started with? And I'll come back to that in a minute. We talk about consumer desirability really as the first part. And then, do we have a right to win? Does Nestle or our brands have a right to win? Do we have the manufacturing capabilities? Do we have the R&D prowess? Do we have the route to market to enable us to do this better than our competition? So we look at that as well. And then, of course, like, do we believe this is a profitable business in the long run? And so we really look at those three factors to make sure we put forth those ideas into the final round for the ones that we believe can be big ideas for the organization.
I love that. So it's really anchored in a consumer need, and does it have the scalability and the feasibility, right, to really
Yep.
be able to deliver on the original intent of the idea. No, I love that. Can we go back? You said something about, consumer desirability. Does
Yeah.
a big idea mean that you're solving a big problem?
For a company of our size, right, we are a $15 billion organization, just Nestle USA, within, a
Okay.
$100 billion global organization. We typically look for big problems to solve, right?
Mhm.
And there's nothing wrong with solving small problems, but to make a dent really in terms of the impact we can make, yeah, to drive what we're hoping, in the first few years is north of a $50 million incremental opportunity requires us to really solve a problem that's bigger than something that's niche or only on the coast, right?
Mhm.
And there's a lot of great companies that are doing that. So we have to see a line of sight to something that has, more mainstream appeal, not for the general population, but for a large enough percentage of that population to solve for. And so that's what we look for, kind of big, hairy, audacious problems or needs that are unmet. And we've demonstrated that time and time again with what we've done with the Nestle portfolio and how we've grown for decades. And so that's really the line of sight that we have.
Oh, great. And what I loved about it is that there was a lot of conversation at pitch day around the problems that Gen Z are facing, right? They're
Absolutely.
living these fast-paced lives. And can you talk a little bit some about the problems that you heard that Gen Z is facing that you all have been trying to see how you can support?
Oh, absolutely. And love Gen Z. I got one of them in my household,
Same.
so I have a deep empathy or
Yes.
understanding of them. My son Dylan.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, there's a number of things. I think one is, they are just a very intelligent, smart consumer that really knows the ins and outs of products, And there's this transparency that hasn't existed before around, for food and beverage, the nutritional profile, what you stand for, are you sustainable, given just the depth of information that's out there and accessible to them at their fingertips. And so, you can't, just advertise your way or position your way into solving their
Right.
problems. It has to
Right.
be super authentic, real, and it has to have, a story behind it. So it's not just
Right.
delivering on a functional benefit. Um, and so that's really an interesting space for us as we think about that, is that it needs to speak to them, right?
Mm,
There's a couple of brands over the past few years that have had really interesting and strong impact on consumers, Gen Z in large part. One of them is Prime Beverage, which is a beverage that was launched by two YouTubers
yep.
that my sons had begged me for
Yes.
months. It's been a bit of a fad. And then Mr. Beast, who is, the basically the number one. And Tori, by the
Yes.
way you're reacting, I think you know what I'm talking about here.
I know. I think it's Gen Z and Gen Alpha. I think it's
Yes,
like going cross generations, right?
absolutely. Yep. I mean, my
Yes.
other son's a Gen Alpha, and it
Same.
plays on both of them.
Yes.
And so, the reality is, like, it has to speak to them and their
Mhm.
reality. And so for me, I think innovation in the past in food and beverage has been largely functional. But there's really a social, emotional component to, call it, your job to be done, that goes beyond. It has to be healthy and convenient, portable. There is is it speaking to me? And so that's really what we saw in a lot of the ideas, is that, is it really having a connection to Gen Z and speak to them, versus being something that's mass market that tries to be something for everybody. So I think that's an important one. The second one, and you talked about it, is breakfast is dinner, dinner is breakfast. The fluidity of life of a Gen
Yes.
Zer is off the chart. So we got to throw out a little bit of the nomenclature that we've used in the past. And, at the end of the day, we talk about snacking. Snacking is an, every moment occasion with their on-the-go lifestyle. And so that is just an area that is exploding, that we need to be a part of in a big way. And then I'd say
Yep.
finally is just convenience, right? Like, consumers, especially Gen Z, they're on the go all the time. So how do we provide them a convenient option to provide the job to be done, is save me some time so I could spend time, doing things that I truly enjoy. And so whether it's, finding ways to drive even quicker, healthier options in an air fryer, or connecting with them, through creators that really resonate with them, there's a multiple number of ways that you could appeal to Gen Z in ways that drive just, the connection to their needs.
Yeah. Now you said a couple of times
Mhm.
jobs to be done. So for
Yeah.
those that may be listening and don't quite know what that means, can you talk a little bit more about jobs to be done and how that helps you understand the table stakes versus the over delivers when it comes to innovation and developing a big idea?
That's a great question, Tori. I think table stakes is a great way to look at it, in terms of, you have number one, table stakes in food and beverage. You have to put together a product that consumers will absolutely love and
Yep.
taste, right? Like, taste is number one. It
Taste is
always will
king.
be.
Always will be. Taste
So
is
it
king.
has to taste great. That's the beauty
Right.
of Nestle. We have
Yep. Great
amazing
tasting. Yep.
product developers and R&D, so we could, deliver the best tasting products at scale for our consumers. That's table stakes. I'd say, second is, like, it has to have a strong nutritional profile. We have pretty strict standards that we deliver in our product profile. And even when you indulge, you want it to be indulging in the best way possible, whether it's through portion control or just better quality ingredients. So I feel like that has become table stakes in the world of food and beverage for sure. And then above and beyond that is really where you got to dig in. And what I love to do as an innovator with my team is, really talk to consumers, right? There are, qualitative research methodologies, ethnographies that really enable you to observe their behaviors. And I shared with you earlier, Toria, some people can't even articulate those unmet
Yeah.
needs because it's such a part of their life. And let me give an example. When I, was doing a innovation uh, research around breakfast, we had a number of people that were letting us kind of observe and ask them questions. And I remember, they were heading off to work, and we would even, follow them in a car. And, this individual would pretty much put their cereal in between their legs as they were driving, and clearly not the safest option, but the
Right.
most convenient for them. And so the job to be done there is how can you provide them, a breakfast that they love,
Yeah.
uh, where they don't want to drive any shortcuts, but make it more convenient for them. In that case, it was having a bowl of cereal or a
Yeah.
yogurt that they needed to have at home. They did not want to waste that time at home. They wanted to have it on the go. So the job to be done is exactly that. Help me find a breakfast solution that I grew up with, but in a
Okay.
way that is convenient and fits my lifestyle. So that's kind of how you frame it. And
Yep.
when you're able to frame a problem or challenge in that way, that's when the ideas are actually come pretty quickly. And so for me, it's a little bit of I think the Albert Einstein quote, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but if you gave me 60 minutes to solve saving the world, I'll spend 55 minutes diagnosing the problem and 5 minutes coming up with the solution. So really understanding what we call that job to be done is such a critical part of the work that we do.
What I love about the example that you gave was that, in observing customers, to your point, you can't ask them what they want. Because was that Henry Ford that said, if I would have
Yeah.
asked customers, they would have asked for faster horses, right? You
Yep.
have to look at not just what they're not saying, but look at their workarounds.
Yep.
So that's a perfect example of, observing their workaround. His workaround was to put the cereal in his lap.
Yep.
And you
Exactly.
have to be observant and notice those kind of nuances, right?
Yes. And you got to be a little bit of a scientist, a little bit of a therapist, a bit of a psychologist, really to kind of see and observe these behaviors. It's an art and science for sure. But what I love about open channel is because right now we have our marketers still really understanding these consumers that may not look like them, may not behave like them. It might be a completely different consumer that we're solving for. But when you open it up to the masses of employees, the 20,000 as consumers, they're able to solve a pain point or tension, or in this case, we call it job to be done for themselves or for their family or friends that they're living with. And so that's why when you see entrepreneurs out there, and you see it on Shark Tank, most of them aren't diagnosing someone else's problem. It's something that they created for themselves or their family or friends, and that's the birth of a founder typically. And so we really try to embrace this founder mentality, within the
Okay.
organization through our employees.
Are there any particular trends or market conditions that you see that can make or break the potential of an idea?
Wow, it's a great question. I wish we had a magic bullet to figure out when's the right time. I mean,
Right. And
you know,
now.
I think everyone, including spend millions of dollars, like how do we time this precisely to hit when the market? But yeah, I mean, there's on the analytical side, we have really good sense through data to understand, how trends are growing over time, and even, look at different stages of trends from inception to growth to kind of hitting its peak. So you really are able to ideally time it at the best time in terms of, for example, what flavors to come out with for, our creamers, or even, looking at, what are some trending cookie flavors where we want to create a new Toll House cookie behind. And so there's a lot of data behind that. When you're talking about big incremental, never seen before innovations, I think the one most important thing is, and it's really important because sometimes it's like I have the big idea, right? And I need to launch it. But the reality with everything we do is it's a learning and iteration process before you really get there. And
Mhm.
so, it's not just a one and done. It's as you go along the path of understanding that consumer problem, doing some experimentation, putting some prototypes out there to get some feedback to understand, well, maybe you're not solving the entire problem. You got to make the solution more mainstream or more broad. that's the work that enables you to eventually meet the consumer where they're at today, not necessarily meet the consumer where they're at 5 years from now. And so I think it changes a little bit of the conversation around getting the timing right to how do we meet the consumer where they're at today or in a year or two when you actually launch something through that iterative process.
I love that. So it's like balancing between being almost a futurist, right? And looking at the headwinds and the tailwinds of kind of what is coming and what's already happened, but also be grounded in meeting the consumer where they are now.
Exactly. Yeah,
Find that big balance. That's right?
absolutely. Well said. Yes,
Yeah,
indeed.
no, I love that. And so that's part of the art and the science of everything. Where do you go for inspiration? There's so much inspiration that's out there in so many different ways. I know some companies, they look outside of their industry.
Yeah.
Some of them look at what's happening on social media. So where do you all go for, when you're trying to mold that idea and balance the future versus where they are now? Where do you go
Yeah.
to for your inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think it's really first and foremost getting very clear on what it is you're going after. So, we could say, oh, I want to look at food and beverage trends, and there's a million places you could go after, and that could actually be, it is overwhelming.
Mhm.
But if I'm looking at one of our businesses and I said, we want to really focus on exciting indulgence, right? Like that's the opportunity space we go after you know, then you have kind of a lens to look through. And the inspiration will be everything from close in, which is let's go into the grocery store and look at our category and see what is exciting and indulgent. But then you broaden out, right? So those concentric circles go out. You'll look at the whole grocery store and say, what are these other adjacent categories doing? That might be exciting, really delivering on that consumer need of something that is exciting, indulging. And then you keep going out even further. And that's what we call related worlds, where we will go into something that, like spas
That's
or
great.
ice cream shops or other areas that deliver against that benefit to draw inspiration from. So that's a little bit of the process and approach of like getting really close to then getting, broadening your scope from food and beverage, in home, food and beverage, out of home to these, as you talked about it, these other categories that really deliver on that opportunity in ways that maybe food and beverage hasn't capitalized on yet. And that's where some of the breakthrough ideas really come to bear.
Yeah, no, one story I heard is that from when Apple was developing their Apple Store, they looked at the hospitality, they looked at
Yep.
Ritz-Carlton. When you create that customer delight experience and that high quality customer experience, and that influenced, how they brought their retail stores to life. So yeah, you can really look at any different category to inspire the experiences that you want your customers to have.
Absolutely. And, I'd put Nespresso stores in that same vein, right? Like very much, designed after the premium experience that you would get in an Apple store, very
Right.
personalized, high end, and very customer focused, versus a Starbucks, which, delivers in that same way, but just a different environment. And so that's, to your point, drawing from these other industries is just a very, useful secret in bringing something that feels new and different to your
Yep.
category that
Yep.
may not be there today.
No, I love that. I love that. So now we've gotten great consumer insights. We've understand our jobs to be done. We've gotten inspiration from different industries
Mhm.
potentially. Now, how do we get people excited about this idea, right? An idea is only as strong as the
Right.
people who rally behind it. When you believe in a big idea, what's your approach to galvanizing support within Nestle to ensure that it gets the resources and the buy-in that it needs to succeed?
I love that question, Toria. Yeah, I mean, this is a corporate innovator's, dilemma a little bit. It's not just about having a great idea,
Right.
but how do you get the pull to drive the resources and investment to drive this at the level of scale that we're talking about? And, it's probably not so dissimilar to, being an entrepreneur out there, realizing you're onto something and realizing I need investment. I need to go out to some VCs to sell them on this idea. And I'd say it's probably pretty similar, but it involves the head and the heart, right? I'd say, you know, the heart piece is really helping, really attaching people who have a fundamental belief, passion, conviction behind the idea and can really, weave together a really strong story on why this idea is big. And you've seen that in Open Channel at Pitch Day, uh, you know, finding these founders within the organization who fundamentally believe in something, and ideally because they're really able to demonstrate the consumer opportunity that it solves.
Yeah.
But then, of course, a company like ours, you're going to be spending, likely millions of ideas to get it, across the country. And so to get that level of investment, including the resources to do it, you need to really put some, data forward that's going to demonstrate what's the size of this prize, right? And getting very granular on what does that mean in terms of the distribution, right? Or are we getting
Yeah.
into all Walmarts, Targets? How's this going to sell at Costco? And then understanding how are we going to manufacture this at scale? Do we have any understanding of the profit that we would be able to deliver on this? And so that's the headpiece, right? Where, in an organization like ours, you're going to have, you know, those individuals, key stakeholders that really need to manage their resources and investments appropriately
Yeah.
and decide which are the innovations that I'm going to invest behind and which are the ones that maybe I won't. And so, yeah, that data is really important. And then there are ways to help understand the consumer desirability, in organizations such as ours, where you do quantitative research to demonstrate with, a good level of certainty and conviction around the appeal that these concepts or ideas have with consumers. And that is a little bit of, the science piece that I think we lean into in a way that really helps us make those decisions in a more objective way.
No, I love that, especially, balancing the head and the heart. And I remember at the Open Channel Challenge, there was a lot of personal stories, right? So how
Yes.
do you bring that consumer problem to life? How do you bring
Mm,
storytelling plays a big part in
absolutely.
to get people understanding and identifying with that problem to solve. And to your
Yeah.
point, you have to jump right into, great, I'm glad you love it. Now let me tell you how it could be feasible, how we can make this happen.
Exactly. And that's where, I think the best innovators are able to get beyond the PowerPoint, right? Like I think everyone's good here in delivering a strong business plan,
That's right.
but to really convey the consumer problem and insight is is what sets those apart. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's through video ethnographies or creative ways by looking at, what's happening on TikTok or other social media channels to really spotlight the consumer need. And, you made a great point before that a lot of consumers are hacking their way to a solution.
Yes.
And so consumers are spending time and energy in their own time and resources to create a solution that we could help
Trying to
them.
solve their own problems. That's right.
Right. And so, yeah, I mean, we see millions of eyeballs looking at, how do I, make a cookie in an air fryer? And so when you see that happen and you're like, well, we got Toll
Yeah.
House. Maybe that's
Yeah.
something we can help the consumer with. So, some of those are pretty easy to demonstrate. Others, require a little more work. But I think, really showcasing the consumer problem that you're solving, I think will set those innovators apart than those that might take a more straightforward PowerPoint path to talk about the opportunity.
I love that. I love that. I love that. So there's so much insight here in how a idea makes it to the market and is really transformative. What happens to those ideas that don't quite pan out as expected? You're working on it, you're passionate about it, and a lot of times people fall in love with the idea, right? They really want to
Right.
see it happen. But I always say you got to fall in love with the problem that you're trying to solve and not the idea, but you get tied to that idea. How do
Yep.
you recognize when it's time to let go and when it's not working?
It's a great question. Yeah, that is the tough part where you got to detach yourself sometimes. Um, and so I've that has enabled me to be, successful in my careers. I've had a lot of failures along the way, and I've learned a lot, and you continuously improve based on those. And I think, if we all have that humility to say, you know what, I it failed, but I learned a lot in the process, and I'm going to do it differently. And so, what I'd say, there's a couple answers to that. One is, there's some objective criteria that we could create to say, here's what I expected this new product to deliver in terms of, what percentage of the population I was expecting to trial this product. And then
Right,
really, what sets a new product apart versus those that don't succeed are consumers coming back to buy it again, what we call a repeat rate, right? So
right,
there's certain KPIs or metrics that we track to drive more an objective view of whether something is successful or not. So
right,
that's one element that I think is really important. The second is ultimately we know as an organization, and we factor in we're going to fail, right? More often than not. It's the nature of innovation. If you're not, that means you're not pushing hard enough. And so,
right.
what is really important, as I talked about earlier, is we have after action reviews on all of these projects, and we gather the insights and learnings from those to enable us to succeed next time. And there's a series of those that I could talk about, right? We um, are expanding our portfolio behind these Outshines, fruit smoothie pouches.
Right.
That is, in center store, competes against the likes of Go Go Squeeze. We launched our first sample at Costco about 3, 4 years ago, and it failed miserably. But
Wow.
we got so much consumer and customer feedback. We
Yeah.
redesigned the product, we redesigned the positioning, and now it's a real, one of our highest growing businesses in our portfolio. And, the likes of Walmart and Kroger just are loving it. And so, and then of course, it's really delivering on a consumer problem. And so you
Yeah.
may not get it right the first time. And that's where you got to keep trying, is ultimately going back to, am I solving that consumer need or problem? Because sometimes your solution is intended to do that, but it misses the mark in some way.
Right.
And so having the humility to say, well, is there something that I'm missing based on that consumer learning that would enable me to go after it in a different way? And so that's really that tenacity and perseverance that's sometimes needed within the innovation community, that I see many succeed because they realize there's another way in.
Yes. Yes. No, that's absolutely right. Persistence plays such a big part of it, and also creating a learning culture, right? It sounds like what you described is learning from your failures, learning
Yep.
from those mistakes, and then bringing that lesson back in and trying it again. I love that. I love that.
Yeah. And that can be hard in an organization, Toria, where, you have very high achieving individuals, right? Where, you know, we're hoping to get A's in all the classes we had, right? We hire very smart people. And so
That's right.
failure is hard. And, we even talk about, do we use the word failure or not? But at the end of the day, like, if we're not failing, and this comes from the top, it's really important. Like, Steve is not only we're not only okay with it, like, we support it. We know that is
Mhm.
what's going to make us better. And so that freedom to fail is just unlocks so much creativity that I'd say there's times in the past where we didn't necessarily have that, and that is what is enabling us to drive a strong innovation culture here at Nestle USA. And so it is, like you said, that learning culture that is just so critical for us to realize that, maybe the way we've been going about things, whether it's new products or how we market to consumers or so many things, is not working as best as it can. And so what do we need to do differently to get better?
Yeah, no, that's really important, because that's why change is so hard within, especially larger
Yeah,
organizations, right? Because we were told that we're supposed to be the A students, we're supposed to get it right every time,
right.
and we're rewarded for being right. But I love the fact that you can create a culture where it's safe to fail forward, right?
Absolutely.
No, I love
Yeah.
that. So I'm going to wrap up now with my last question. I can go on and on. I can geek out about this
I know
stuff.
this is fun.
This is fun, right?
I know it. Listen, if you want to have me back at some point, I would love
I
to. I
think
really
so.
appreciate
I think so. I think we can make that happen. I can geek out. I'm an innovator at heart,
it.
and I
Same.
started in food and beverage in my kind of innovation and marketing career. So I can do this all day. This is fun for me.
Exactly.
But I wanted to just kind of conclude with, for those who are listening and they think they have a big idea, and they want to bring it into reality, what
Yeah.
advice do you offer? What should emerging innovators, people who love to geek out like I do, like you and I do, what should they focus on, particularly in those critical early stages, to make sure that their idea gains traction?
Yeah. And sorry, are you speaking to those kind of individual entrepreneurs out there that are onto something, or even those within a corporate environment?
I say both because I think there may be some
Yeah.
overlap. Wouldn't you agree? Right? And that
Yeah,
they
I mean, there's
are
definite
not.
overlap. I think
Yeah,
there's some
absolutely.
consistent threads, Trey, as you
Yeah.
know, which is, and you said it, it's like the conviction and resilience is needed across anyone who's innovating, right? In any industry, in any, whether it's an organization or your own, like it's convincing people of something that hasn't been created before and there's a need for it, is not easy. And so conviction and resilience, I think, is critical, right? And realizing and understanding that no and rejection is just part of the process, right? Because that could be very challenging to receive some of that feedback, and it could stop you in your tracks or make you rethink what you're doing. And so there's just that fundamental belief. And again, it always centers around going back to, are you solving a problem for the consumer? And
Yeah.
so I think it's always validating that and making sure that it's not just a good idea you have, but it's solving a consumer need. And so I say that is also consistent, regardless of whether you're an entrepreneur or you're working as a corporate innovator. That is also consistent. I'd say in a with an entrepreneur too. It's interesting. There's this great Jeff Bezos video that demonstrates a little bit of the difference between entrepreneurs and corporate innovators, where one no could stop you in corporate innovation. It's like, if my president doesn't see this, there's no other path forward. And you're an entrepreneur. you know you could go to Silicon Valley and get a no from one VC, go down the road, get another no. You could be pretty resilient to find finally the 13th one, where you got 12 no's, maybe the 13th one will give you the yes. With
Right.
that said, the resiliency is critical for both individuals. One is just knowing that just because you get 12 no's doesn't mean you won't get the yes the 13th time. And with someone in a corporate environment, the resiliency may be, okay, maybe I need to reposition this, maybe I need to look at it in a different way, maybe I need to understand what is the incentive of this stakeholder individual and why this would benefit him or her. And so it's just different how you approach it, but the underlying principle of being resilient is, I think, maybe one of the most top three important characteristics of what you need to be in order to be an innovator. So, I think that's one of those where I'm sure there's a list of many others that you and I could come back with, Toria, but for sake of today, that's the one I'm going with.
No, I love it. I love it. It actually reminds me something of my Gen Z son said that he learned that sometimes your method has to be more, make sure I quote him correctly. Your mission has to be more important than your method, right?
Hmm.
So the focus,
Yes.
your mission, the problem that you're trying to solve, it can be solved in many different ways, but you have to be committed and dedicated to that mission, to that problem that you're trying to solve.
I love that. Yes.
Thank you so much for joining
Thank you,
and
Toria.
having a chat with me today. I would love to invite you back. Like I said, I can have this conversation. I love big ideas. I get goosebumps of it.
I know.
I like to say that I can see the acorn, the tree in the acorn, right? I can see the oak tree in the acorn. Sometimes that
Yeah.
small little nugget, you see the big potential of it. So I
Yeah.
love having this conversation, and I appreciate you joining me today.
I appreciate that. That's what you're doing. I just love, right? That, hopefully a number of people that you're going to touch and impact by having this series help guide them along the way. I wish I had that early in my career, right? There's a lot of great wisdom out there of those that have, been through it before, that you're helping kind of share out with the larger community. So thanks for what you're doing, and, honored to be a part of it.
Thank you so much for joining, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Toria.